Nyki here with the Canton Museum of Art presenting Museum to Go Takeout. If you weren't with me the first week that I did this, I suggest you go back and check out that video. We are presenting content every Wednesday at noon on our Facebook page, and this content is content for children and families and hopefully people of all ages to experiment with art while everyone is staying at home. In this episode, we're going to be exploring some wonderful relationships between our permanent collection, science, and art. First, we're going to talk about a piece by a ceramic artist named Todd Leech, and then we're going to kind of talk about different types of weathering. So chemical weathering, physical weathering, and then we're also going to be talking about chemical reactions between art materials and other materials. Today, we're going to be using some things that you might have around your house. So here in front of me, I have rubbing alcohol, olive oil, but you can really use any kind of cooking oil. I find vegetable oil also works really well. I have salt. I also have food coloring, and I have red, yellow, and blue food coloring. I have some paper towels, and last but not least, I have a container of water. And my container of water will be used to help me spread around some food coloring, but it may also be useful for cleaning up messes because this project can get a little bit messy. Let's explore this art by Todd Leech. This piece was featured in an exhibition called Spirit of Clay, which happened in the fall of 2019 at the Canton Museum of Art. And this exhibition was all about how artists put themselves into a piece of work. Todd Leech is a ceramic sculptor, and this means that he uses clay to sculpt his forms with. In Todd Leech's piece Rollin', featured on the screen, you can see a lot of interesting textures and colors. Todd Leech formulates glazes which sit on the surface of his ceramics, and these glazes have a lot of bubbles and things in them. And he actually uses a process called sandblasting, where he sprays the surfaces of his ceramics with sand to help break down these glazes that he's made. That's what creates these really interesting textures. Todd Leech is very interested in deterioration and the breaking down of the environment. He's also interested in the breaking down of our bodies over time because of different ailments that we might have or because of aging. Todd Leech's pieces also feature an interesting color palette, and this particular piece has some blue-green, which I'm suspecting might come from the copper in his glazes. When the copper interacts with oxygen in the kiln during firing, it turns into a blue-green color, and we'll talk a little bit about copper oxidation in our upcoming slides. When we start to talk about physical and chemical weathering in the upcoming slides, comment below and let me know what similarities you see between the processes that Todd Leech uses in making his ceramic sculpture and naturally occurring physical and chemical weathering. So we talked about Todd Leech, and we talked about his sandblasting process, which I mentioned was a type of physical weathering. We're going to delve a little deeper into some different kinds of weathering, and then I think we should get talking about how we can mix science and art to make a really exciting art project. I can't wait. Physical weathering can be caused by wind, sand, friction, avalanches, or freezing and thawing of water over time. If you look at the diagram at the bottom of the screen, you'll see how water can collect in cracks in rocks, and over time, freezing and thawing can make those rocks crack apart, and it causes physical weathering. Also, if you think about an avalanche and rocks maybe falling down the side of a mountain and breaking those rocks underneath apart, that's also a type of physical weathering. Anything that changes the surface of rocks or the land or any other part of the world can be physical weathering. Much like with Todd Leech's sandblasting process, sand can blow across the surface of rocks and earth and can end up changing how the surface looks over time. With Todd Leech, he uses a man-made process to break down his ceramic surfaces, but you can also think of that happening naturally on the Earth's surface. Next, we're going to explore chemical weathering and oxidation and how these chemical reactions with the world can change the surface of different materials and the Earth. Chemical weathering happens when salt, acid, and other chemicals are deposited into rock and building materials. So, I like to give the example of the Statue of Liberty. A lot of people think that the Statue of Liberty is made out of some kind of stone, but in fact, the Statue of Liberty is made out of copper. And over time, the salt from the ocean around the Statue of Liberty has collected on the surface, and the salt, in conjunction with oxygen floating around the Statue of Liberty, and also acid in the rain, has caused what's called a patina on the surface. A patina is when a certain type of organism or material grows on the surface of an item and changes it. A lot of the time, metal will patina over time. Maybe you've seen a silver spoon and it has gotten tarnished over time. Or, like the Statue of Liberty, maybe you've seen a blue-green form on the surface of a penny. Like I was talking about with Todd Leech's piece, Rollin', you can see the blue-green in his piece, and that blue-green is probably caused by oxygen and fire reacting with his glaze. In the case of copper, oxygen and fire and oxygen and water can act very much the same. Another type of oxidation that you may have seen before is rust on the surface of steel. And rust happens because the iron in the steel interacts with oxygen and maybe water and acid in rain. And when these chemical reactions happen, it causes the color of the iron to come through as the steel deteriorates away. Next, we're going to talk about how chemical reactions between our art materials and other materials we may have around our house are kind of like the chemical reactions that happen during chemical weathering. Let's get started on our project. Now, you can see I have a really big piece of paper in front of me. This piece of paper is just a large piece of scrap paper that I had laying around. You can do this with a small piece of paper. You can do this with a really large piece of paper. It doesn't have to be great paper, but it should be something a little bit thick so that it can hold some water and some dye. Some papers, if you rub them too much when you get them wet, will start to crumble a little bit. And so that's a reason why you kind of want a heavier paper, because you may be rubbing this or at least dabbing it. Also, it's going to get pretty wet. I'm going to say there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. When I'm using my food coloring, I'm just going to get a couple of tiny drops on here. The reason why I just want a couple of tiny drops is because a little bit goes a long way. dye is highly pigmented, which means that it actually has a lot of color in it. So I have a paintbrush here. If you don't have a paintbrush, that's okay. You can use some paper towels. First, I'm going to start by just kind of moving these around a little bit, and we're going to work fast. I want to start experimenting because I want to find out what happens when I add certain materials. Let's see what happens when I add a drop of rubbing alcohol. Came out a little faster than I wanted it to, but you can see that there are some kind of interesting things happening here. I'm also going to try adding a little bit of salt to the surface of my food coloring. I'm just doing this by putting it in my hand, but if that's a little too messy for you, you can use a regular salt shaker. I'm putting a lot on here because I want to also see what happens when I experiment with maybe adding a couple other colors. Now, this is a part where color theory really comes into play. Red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors. Red and yellow make orange, as you will see when I drop this little bit of yellow on here. Red and blue make purple. I'm going to dip my paintbrush in some water just to make sure that I get that off before I try to spread around the red and the blue to show you where the purple kind of shows underneath. There's a reason why I'm dabbing my brush with water, and I will talk to you about it in just a minute. This is part of our little lesson on color theory. Yellow and blue make green. And I'm going to see what happens when I add a little bit of oil to the surface. And this is also a little bit messy. I like to just kind of put it on my finger. Ooh. And then kind of dab it around. So not much is happening between this green and where I put the oil on top. But you can watch when I try to add a little more blue in this area. And you can see that the oil actually doesn't mix with the food coloring. This is because food coloring is a water base. So if you think about oil and water, usually you think about how they don't mix. This is a chemical reaction that also happens between food coloring and oil. You can kind of spread it around and get these little tiny dots from it. You can also move it to the side and see how a tiny bit of blue stays there. Now, since oil and water don't mix, the water isn't going to get the oil off of your brush very well. So that's a good reason to have a paper towel handy. You can gently rub your brush on the paper towel and it'll get some of the oil off. Now I'm going to clean my brush with water again. And the reason why I'm getting the colors off between the times when I'm rubbing with the brush is because if you mix colors like green and red, for example, or blue and orange, or purple and yellow, you get a neutral, which means that you get brown or gray. So if I just kept dumping food coloring all over this whole thing, it would probably turn brown. I don't want it to turn brown because I kind of like what's happening here. And we're going to talk a little bit about some projects you could do with this piece of paper once it's full, or you could just leave it as a beautiful art piece to do whatever you'd like with. I'm going to experiment a little bit more. Now that this is kind of drying a little, we can see that there are salt crystals still on top. I'm going to put a dot of red, and you can see how it follows the salt crystals. So salt begins to suck up that pigment in the food coloring, and it kind of starts to make these little areas underneath where when you remove the salt when it's dry, there are tiny white dots because the salt soaks up all the color. It adds a really cool effect. I kind of like to think of it as if you left a piece of paper out and you had all kinds of dye on it and then maybe the rain fell on it, it kind of looks like rain speckles or something like that. You can see that I'm getting some really interesting patterns and things starting to happen here from my science experiment. If you could comment below and you could tell me what your favorite thing is that you've learned from the science experiment so far as you've been doing it along with me, I would love that. I also want to see your work, so if you could share your work on any social media platform and hashtag museum to go, that would be wonderful. So as we talked about earlier, chemical weathering is a little bit different than chemical reactions like we're seeing here. But when we were talking about oxidation and we were talking about things that Todd Leech uses in his pieces of artwork with both physical and chemical weathering, we were talking about copper oxidation and the Statue of Liberty and all of those kinds of things. What I think is really cool about this is you can kind of see how when you do different things, it changes. You can see that when I'm moving this with the alcohol, the color is washing away in places. You can also see that some of the color is falling away from the oil because it's sitting on top, and we're creating an amazing chemical reaction that's happening right before our eyes. Science can be super fun, and I think a lot of the time we think of science as math, and we think of science as all of these kind of scary equations, and maybe we think of science as biology, and we're thinking of anatomy and studying the body. But when you think about art, all art couldn't exist without science, and science couldn't really be taken as far as it has been taken without art. There are a lot of exciting things that happen in museums where people work to conserve pieces of art. They work to clean them, and they work to make sure that old pieces of art don't fade over time. They make sure that light and the air and humidity and all of those kinds of things are creating the perfect physical environment for old art pieces. So museums are really important to furthering science in the way that they study how art changes over time. Art materials are also a huge part of science, and science is a huge part of art materials. So if you've ever heard of something called tempera paint, maybe you painted with tempera paint in elementary school. A long time ago, it used to be that tempera paint was made with eggs and different pigments from some natural plants and things like that. And over time, we found different ways to maybe mix oil with pigments and make oil paints. We've mixed plaster with pigments and made fresco. So there are so many really cool things that you can do with science and with art. Now, I poured a ton of alcohol on there, but I just wanted to see how it turned into this kind of stormy, cloudy world. Now that my picture is dry, you can see some little areas where the salt was. You can see how it kind of picked up that pigment and, like I was talking about, kind of made these little white spots when I rubbed it off. You can see the area right in the middle where the oil primarily was and where those little bits of food coloring got down in there and left circles, but how mostly when I brushed it around, it stuck on the outside of where the oil is. The oil kind of kept the paper mostly white. You can see areas here where the alcohol carried the pigment, but also alcohol dries really fast, so it evaporates, and when it evaporates, it takes some of the color with it, so you can see that there's an absence of color in some of those spots, and you can see all the areas where the pigments blended together to create some really exciting and interesting different colors. There are a lot of things that I could do with this, but because Earth Day is coming up, I'm going to teach you how to make a recyclable sun catcher that you can hang in your window that will catch the light. So now that I'm done with my picture and everything is dry, I have cut it out, and there are some really exciting things that I see happening here. But something that I'm most excited about is how this will catch the light. So if I hold it up to a light, there will be parts that I'll be able to see through, and there will be parts that I won't be able to see through as well. Now, when this is in front of a window, it's going to pick up light regardless of if you can see through it or not. But some of the areas that you can see through the best might be the best areas to make a sun catcher with. I decided that I'm going to use a clean water bottle, and I'm sure that you might have maybe a 2-liter bottle or a water bottle of some sort, or maybe a plastic takeout container or something that you could use to either tape this onto, glue it onto, or in this case, I'm just going to slide it in the bottom of this water bottle. So what I'm going to start doing first is, and this would probably be good for younger ones to have a parent helping, I'm going to just shove some scissors in there so my water bottle's kind of resting on my scissors. And I'm going to cut around my bottle, leaving a lip along the bottom. Next, I'm going to trace around the bottle by putting it down with the cut side to the paper, and I'm just going to choose a place on my image that I feel would be a good place for the sun to show through. You can do this by holding it up to the light, or you can just do this by using your imagination and also choosing whatever part of it you like best. I think I'm going to choose this little bluish part here. So I've made a circle where I would like my cut to be, and I'm just going to cut that out using the same scissors that I just used. Make sure to cut along the line that you made with your pencil and not inside or outside of the line so it fits snugly in the bottom of your water bottle. If there's still droplets of water in your water bottle, don't worry. You can just kind of clean it out. I'm going to take this little piece that I made and I'm just going to shove it in there. And it's going to create a really kind of interesting effect. It kind of almost looks like it's underwater or something with the texture of the bottom of the water bottle. That texture is also going to pick up light and kind of make it bounce around. You can go ahead and put a couple pieces of Scotch tape in here to hold it in really well. But what we're going to do next is we're going to poke a hole through the top. Now again, this would be a good one maybe for an adult to help with, but you can either take your scissors and poke a hole through, or you can use a hole punch to punch through. After this, I'm going to show you, I have a piece of yarn that I'm going to tie onto it, and then I'll show it to you hanging in front of my window. So here is my finished sun catcher, and I've just tied a piece of yarn through the hole that I made at the top, and you can see it's hanging on my window. You can hang it up with Scotch tape, or if you have a window lock to hang it from, that's another option. You can see the light kind of coming through and catching it in an interesting way. This is a great project to talk about recycling with. Go ahead and comment below and tell me what you love to do with recycled objects. I know a lot of people do art with recyclables, and I would love to hear about some that maybe you've done. So for the last part of this project, you can decide to do this or not, but I have quite a bit left over. And when I have leftovers of things, I love to use my scraps to make some really exciting and different projects out of them. Why not? Why would I just throw this away? It's beautiful. So what I'm going to do is, I know that right now some of us can't see family or friends that we're used to seeing, and I am really thinking about the people close to me in this time. And while it's been kind of difficult not to see them, I know that a lot of them would probably appreciate a homemade card. So I'm just going to use some of these scraps to make a little bit of spring flowers on a card. You could also, if you celebrate Easter, use this to make some really cool Easter eggs, I think. I'm going to make a card for my grandma because I know that she would love one. I'm just drawing kind of a normal flower shape. Not sure if you can see that. This yellow over here I'm also going to use for a flower, but I'm going to make it a different shape. And I have a lot of greens in here that I can use for leaves and things like that. So I'll start by cutting these out. And then you might have glue at home or glue sticks, and you could easily glue these on. But if you don't have glue or glue sticks, you can go on YouTube and find ways to make glue with flour and water. You can make wheat pastes and all kinds of things. So if you want to take this further and make your own glue, you can look it up. It's pretty fun. And these look so cool. This is such a cool and interesting little flower that looks amazing on the front of a card. These are just some simple things that we can do to send to people we care about. And who doesn't love getting something in the regular mail? I love getting stuff in the mail. Go ahead and comment below, and if you're making a card, tell me who you're making a card for and why. Tell me who you wish you were seeing right now, maybe what you wish you were doing with them. It's really important in this time to stay connected and remember the people and the places and the things that are really important to us in our lives. So I just have a couple of flowers here, and for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just cut a little line out of here for each of these. Now maybe you don't have any of these colors on the one that you made. You can make your own shapes and your own designs. You could, like I said earlier, make Easter eggs. You could even make the world if maybe you want to send an Earth Day card. You could make all kinds of things. And this is a really fun project that you can do with your family or you can do alone. We'll pick that up later. So right now, I'm just going to take my glue stick, put a little glue on the back, and I'm just going to glue everything down. Now if you could tag your final work with #museum2go so I can see all of the exciting things you've made. Here are the flowers that I've put on my card for now, and I will probably add to this and put leaves on and all kinds of other things. I'll write a note in it to send to my grandma, but this is just a simple way that you can use some of your scraps. Another cool thing that you could do if you really can't think of anything to write in a card, but you want to send a card to someone you love, is you could write a card and tell them about how much you learned from this project with Museum2go and how you did all kinds of exciting things with science. So you can talk to your friends and your family members about all of the things that you're doing to stay busy, and maybe they'll even write you a letter back and you can gain a pen pal from all of this. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned about a bunch of ways in which science and art can come together to make an amazing, amazing piece of art. I hope that you learned a lot through this. Please comment below, share this video, let me know all of the things that you found out while you were doing the scientific method, all of the things that you're doing to have fun during this time. Let me know who you sent your cards to, and stay tuned. Check into the Canton Museum of Art's Facebook page every Thursday for the other parts of this lesson, like the teacher's resource packet and a couple of other exciting things like a virtual tour of our museum so that you can see the exhibit that corresponds to the art that you're learning about. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful Wednesday. I will see you next wonderful Wednesday. Bye.